Hi there, I'm Stephen Leptak, Executive Editor of The Drum, and I am hosting this special panel to discuss one of the major headlines that has happened this week in the advertising industry, which was around the English government actually moving forward with the long discussed possibility of implementing further changes to the regulation of, well, trying to make people healthier and regulating junk food advertising. And that will actually expand across both television, traditional media and online, which adds an extra layer of complexity. So the panel here today are going to discuss just why this is happening and the implications both for society, but also especially for the advertising community as well. And I'd like to ask my panel to introduce themselves. Graham, can I start with yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Graham McGregor. I'm chair of Action on Sugar, which is an expert body of scientists looking at the evidence as to how to prevent. We also do a lot of work on salt as well, and trying to stop people developing high blood pressure, which we've been very successful in the UK. And I work at Barts and London Hospital.
And John, you next.
Yes, so I'm John Mew. I'm the CEO of the Internet Advertising Bureau in the UK.
And Sue?
Used as Director of Public Affairs at the Advertising Association, which is the umbrella body for the advertising and media industries.
And you're joined by our last panellist.
Hello, I'm Matthew Evans and I'm Head of Corporate Affairs at the Advertising Association.
So thanks for doing this. We've pulled this together quite quickly in order to have this discussion. It's certainly flared some debate from what I've seen, especially among the Drum's readers, talking about what it means. Graham, can I start with you by asking why is this been so desperately needed that the government has reviewed how advertising works when it comes to fast food and unhealthy food? It's certainly been discussed for a long time now.
Well, there are two reasons really, one very immediate and one long term. That is unhealthy food, that's food that's high in salt, fat and sugar and lacks fruit and vegetable, is now, according to the Global Burden of Disease, a big study funded by Bill Gates, looking at what causes us to die and to suffer from before we die, shows that unhealthy food is now by far the biggest cause of death and disability, far outstripping tobacco. And you remember all the arguments we had about tobacco and restricting advertising. So we've got to face the fact that unhealthy food is now the biggest cause of death in the world and the UK. Not only that, it's a major factor in causing obesity, and we all know the reasons why we want to avoid obesity, because we're more likely to get cardiovascular disease, that's heart attacks and strokes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, but much more likely to get type 2 diabetes, which is an awful disease, commonest cause of blindness, amputation, etc. And now there's an immediate threat because it's become quite clear that COVID-19, if you're overweight, even slightly overweight, and if you're grossly overweight, you're greatly at increased risk of susceptibility to COVID-19 and dying as well. The more obese you are, the more likely you are to die. And this seems to be a rational thing. We know that obese people have defects in their immunity. We know they have more receptors in their lungs for the way the virus gets into the lungs on the ACE2 receptor. And we also know that it's much more difficult to respirate or get oxygen into obese people. So there are very good reasons why they die. So we have an immediate crisis of trying to get people to lose weight now, and we have a long-term crisis of preventing people getting obese. And this is what all it's about. And obviously, marketing, advertising and promotion of foods is one of many things we've got to hit this at. And that's a very important part of it.
Yeah, and it seems that the proposals that the government is going to proceed with come from the cancer research proposals around implementing a watershed ban of 9 p.m, both in terms of television, but also online, which seems a bit of a surprise, I have to say. Sue, what is your take on what has been proposed?
Thanks, Stephen. I think to start with, we want to say that the industry fully understands the crisis of obesity that faces this country and the issues around COVID and being the added problems you have if you're obese. So we certainly think that it's support a plan to tackle obesity with effective measures. And you know, some of the things that have been announced over the weekend and in the last few days are really helpful. Obviously, really important that people lead a healthy lifestyle and exercise and have a balanced intake of food. But I suppose we are hugely disappointed that the headline measures are measures which frankly aren't going to work by the government's own analysis. The government's impact assessment only a few months ago said that introducing a pre-9 o'clock watershed ban would have a minuscule impact on children's calorie intake. We're talking about 1.7 calories a day, or less than half a Smartie. And you know, considering the wide impact that will have on broadcasting, production, the creative industries in general, and the jobs at stake, we question whether this is a sensible and proportionate measure. So we're fully in favour of tackling obesity, but we think it's got to be a range of measures that are targeted and proven to be effective.
Mm-hmm. Matt, the Advertising Association obviously talks to the government, and it has been talking to the government even more so than ever of recent times. What has the government been telling you in the lead up to this? How much of a surprise was it?
Well, certainly the extent of it in terms of the potential total online ban was surprising for the whole of industry, I think. And the government itself, I think, as Sue mentioned, has gone against its own advice in this argument of the effectiveness. I think it's important to reflect that there are a myriad of different things which affect obesity in this country. One of which, and for me, I think deprivation is a key factor that should be recognised by the government, and perhaps hasn't been up till now. The fact that obesity rates in the poorest boroughs of the UK, for example, Kingston upon Hull, is double that of some of the richest, such as Richmond-on-Thames. And with advertising being a very visible form of communicating marketing in this country, whether that be for cars or clothing or anything, not just food, it's probably sometimes easier to find fault in the most visible things rather than reflect on what the government could have done itself over many decades to change policy in society that may have led to this issue with obesity.
And John, from your perspective, the idea that this is going to extend to online advertising, having a watershed for online, what are your thoughts on how that's going to work?
Not well, I think, are my thoughts. I guess to echo, Sue's points, that you can't argue with Graham's points on, the science and the research that obesity is a problem that we need to tackle. But the government's science and research shows, as Sue said, that a watershed won't work. It will make a negligible difference, but there will be massive negative consequences of it. So whether it's large media owners are going to be hit because they will lose, significant chunks of their revenue, and the timing of this could not be any worse. There has never been a worse point in the history of our economy, in the history of our industry, than right now. So to take away another major revenue stream when the government have said it won't make any difference to what they're trying to achieve seems daft. And if you take it to its extremes, we don't know all of the details yet, but it may lead to some very odd situations. So if you think about SMEs, so small businesses, if I've got a fish and chip store in Crewe, what does that mean I can do? I can advertise on Google Maps so people can find my fish and chip shop after 9 p.m. I can't have it on Google Maps before 9 p.m. I can have a website after 9 p.m. with a menu on it. I can't have one before 9 p.m. It doesn't make any sense. It's not logical. And I think that's sort of the big challenge for us, is that there's definitely a need to act as a country and as a society, but it needs to be thought through how we do it.
So, Professor McGregor, what is your reaction to what has been announced?
Well, it's sad, isn't it? It's exactly what we expect. It reminds me, I wasn't myself involved in tobacco, but very much read about it and was very involved as an observer. And this is exactly the arguments we had when various moves came in to restrict tobacco advertising. And it was quite clear that we needed to ban it. It's quite clear to me that we need to ban all forms of advertising, marketing, promotion of unhealthy food. Now, the food industry and the advertising has an alternative. You can make healthy food, you can reformulate these foods so they are healthy, then you can advertise. No one is saying you can't market and advertise healthy food. That's what I want to see. And I think there's a very strong moral responsibility. Many of the people who are in cigarette marketing moved into the food industry when it was closed down. Now, I'm not accusing you of any of working in the tobacco industry, but a lot did. And it's the same philosophy, the same thing. I don't have any ethics. I have no morals. I'm prepared to sell this unhealthy food to vulnerable young children, make them obese and kill them with type 2 diabetes. That's what you're doing. That is the reality. And you've got to face that reality, just as the tobacco manufacturers had to. And eventually it was stopped, and it will be stopped. There's no question that worldwide there will be a ban, as there is now, more or less, on tobacco. And remember that this is the biggest cause of death. We can't let people die. Now, I agree, it's one move. It's not the only move that we're going to do. It's got to reformulate the food with less sugar, fat, and salt, and increased fruit and vegetable consumption by hiding it in foods and taking out the sugar and fat. And also taxing food. The soft drink levy is very, very successful in getting them to reformulate. And taxes should be used both to hit unhealthy food and subsidize healthy food, and particularly targeting it to the socially deprived people who are much more likely and die many years before us. And of course, that's where you, as marketeers and advertisers, promoters, target your adverts. There's very good evidence that you're targeting the socially deprived because they're the more likely ones to be influenced. And my answer is also, why do you make such a fuss? If this is so unimportant in selling unhealthy food, why are you protesting about it?
Susie, you have a response for that?
I think
if this advertising doesn't have an effect, why does the food industry pay you to do it?
Well, I think
exactly the same I have the tobacco. Say to them, well, why are you advertising tobacco? It was the brand of cigarette they were advertising. They needed, every time 1 million people died, they had to recruit another 1 million people to smoke. And that's the same with unhealthy food. When people die from unhealthy food, you have to recruit more people to make them poison them with this unhealthy food. You must realize this is a slow, chronic poison. Salt puts up your blood pressure, the biggest single cause of death. Fat puts up your cholesterol, which causes atheroma. Obesity causes cancer, 10 different forms of cancer. Type 2 diabetes. We've got to stop advertising unhealthy food. What the food industry's got to do is to promote healthy food, and it can do. It can do it easily, and it can make money from it, and so can you. You know, very few of the advertisements that you run are for healthy food. Why?
I think that tobacco is a very different product to...
No, it's not. This is a bigger killer than tobacco. Tobacco kills around 6 million people a year. High blood pressure kills 10 million. Cholesterol causes several million. And obesity and type 2 diabetes cause several million as well. So you can add them up. And far more people are now dying from unhealthy food than from tobacco. We've managed to...
I think we're talking here about a range of products that are the government has branded as high-fat salt sugar, which include a vast range of different household products, not just the things that you may be thinking about, Professor, but a range of different things from bread, olive oil, tinned fruit, things that people have in their cupboards that are everyday products. This is not like one product, cigarette, which kills you. This is about multiplicity of different things. And advertisers aren't putting them on television or online or in other media, as you say, to deliberately focus, target children. Basically, 95% of the audience on television before 9 o'clock is adult for these products. That's the market. So, and online, it's very, very targeted, as John will talk about. So I think if we could see that there was a definitive case based on a direct link with consumption, that would be different. But all the evidence that is being trotted out is not making a good case that there's a direct link between advertising and consumption. Now, of course, we accept that that these areas need regulating. It has been regulated for the last 15 years. Exposure to these products has dropped by 70%, but there's been no impact on children's obesity levels. So, of course, there is stuff that the advertising and food and drink industries need to do, but I think it needs to be a proportionate approach, because these kinds of things, if they are the headline initiatives that the government is focusing on, then they've got it wrong, and that is a real problem to us all.
Well, I don't agree, I'm sorry, but marketing and promotion and advertising of unhealthy food is a major way the food industry sells new products and sells old iconic products that are not good for you, and they poison you, and we need to stop it. I agree on the borderline. If we use the nutrient profile model, obviously when you divide anything up into unhealthy and healthy, there's always going to be, where do you draw the line? And I don't disagree that there is a consultation here, 2 years consultation, which is far too long in our view, before it comes in. You can adjust things there, but I can give you an example, which you gave in another interview. You came up with a mint sauce that is made by Coleman's, which has 25% sugar. Well, anyway, let me give you this example. It's 25% sugar, so that doesn't qualify. Whereas the Tesco mint sauce only has 12% or thereabouts sugar, so that is healthy. So there's no reason why a lot of the products you're saying are unhealthy can't be changed overnight into something that's healthy. There's no problem. The industry can easily reformulate. We've reduced salt in all the products in the UK that are sold in supermarkets by 30 to 40% over the last 10 years. We can do the same. And this banning of unhealthy advertising before 9 on television and all the internet will induce that as well. It will have a huge effect.
Can I bring in Matt here, and then followed by John, and we'll come back to you, Professor. Let's give everyone a chance here. Matt, what were you going to say?
Yeah, certainly. I think, in terms of reformulation food, I think it's important to remember that these ingredients aren't always just there for taste. For example, sugar in cakes assists with the rising of them. They have actual they have an important role in the cooking process to make the products. It's not always just there for taste, effectively. So I think that has to be borne in mind. And in certain products, you cannot use artificial.
We have a huge experience in reformulation, both of salt, where we were told it was technical problems, impossible, it's not true. The same for sugar. The food industry is very entrepreneurial. The big food companies, I agree, it may be difficult, some of the smaller family-owned shops and butchers and things, to make some processed meats and things that, with less salt. But for the big food industry people, it's relatively easy. Nestle can easily get products. They've already reformulated, so have Kellogg's, quite a lot of their cereals, to get them below the 9 o'clock or the watershed that already occurs. So, I think this will encourage the food industry to reformulate very quickly. And I don't think there will be any reduction in marketing and food advertising as a result of this. You've got 2 years notice of it. And I think you'll find that marketing and food will go up, and it will be healthy food. And you should be welcoming that. What's sad to me is you don't welcome this and think of ways around it, just like this, that we could reformulate the food so it becomes healthy, and then we can advertise it. Because I still think, I come back to my point, that it's unethical, particularly to sell to vulnerable children who have no idea of the dangers of this. You can say to adults, yes, we should know this is unhealthy. Of course, the vast majority of people don't know that. You and I may know it, but they don't know that. But children have no way of saying, this is bad for me, I shouldn't have it. And then they pester their parents to go and buy it, and the parents give in. I think sometimes you need to think about the morals of this.
Can I bring in John here? John, what is your take on all of this?
Well, I mean, it's a very good point, and I'm glad you kind of bring in the morals of it. And you talked about the tobacco ban, and you're absolutely right. That the industry was totally wrong on that. But you can't compare all food with tobacco.
Well, you can be unhealthy foods.
Right. But so the industry, without the government intervening, the industry has already stopped children from seeing HFS ads almost in its entirety online. The average child sees less than half a second per day of HFS ads online. So without us needing to be told to do it by the government, we've already taken a moral stance. We've got the most advanced restrictions pretty much in the world in trying to do that. Well, there's limitation to what we can achieve as media trade bodies, in that we don't control the formulation of foods, we just control the advertising.
I understand that.
And I agree, food does need to be reformulated, and I think the work you've done has done a massive way to helping, gone a massive way to helping that to happen. But it is that there are, unfortunately, the blunt measures that the government are talking about have some very will have some crackers consequences. And I use the word crackers because crackers would fall in the category of things that would be banned from being advertised. If I own a cheese shop, the government are talking about following the rules that the ASA use and the things that the ASA regulate, which includes all websites, which means I can no longer, if I'm a cheese shop, I can no longer have a website about my shop. I can no longer talk about what I do. I can no longer, direct people online to find my shop. How on earth am I supposed to exist as a business anymore? It's now is just such an awful time to be penalising so many businesses across the country.
Well, you've given an example there. There is a consultation, which is not, the online ban has not actually come in. It's due to consultation. You can bring these points up. We're not unreasonable in the sense that, clearly we need to do this with thoughtful intentions. Cheese is not a very healthy product. I know that everyone thinks it is, but it's very high in salt, very high in saturated fat, and very high in calories, very calorie dense. So I think small amounts of cheese are fine, but you have to look at the broader issues. And I agree there may be some, the one that normally would bring up, which you haven't, is of course, I think you did actually, olive oil. And obviously we're not going to restrict the advertising and marketing of olive oil. You shouldn't eat it in large amounts. 1 tablespoon is equivalent to four apples. So you need to think, if it's oil, there's a lot of calories in it, but we're not, I don't think we're completely bonkers, in terms of being sensible about where the line is drawn. But it's very difficult when you come up with these regulations of what is healthy and unhealthy to divide where do you divide it? And I think we all recognize that, and that's where you have to have an intelligent conversation with the food industry about where would there be some exceptions. And I'm not against that, but I think the generality of it is that in general, unhealthy food should not be advertised or marketed. And I'm disappointed that the government didn't go far enough in banning it across the board, because that will happen in the long term. There's no doubt if you go worldwide and look at everyone becoming obese, everyone developing high blood pressure, that the global food industry is now responsible for all these people dying, and that's the reality. We can't get away from it, and they don't have to do that. They can make healthy food and we'd live longer, and they could do what they like with the healthy food and make a lot of money. So I think we need to see a switch from talking about all these unhealthy foods, which are largely the ones that are marketed, to healthy food. And this is the time to do it, particularly with the threat of COVID-19, another infectious wave coming in. We need to really think, how can we help those people who are overweight and obese and immediately get them to go on a more healthy diet and to lose some weight?
So can I ask, it's still early days obviously, but what are you already talking about in terms of going back to on the consultation to say or try to change? What will be the Advertising Association's response to this?
Well, obviously we remain very concerned about the process of announcing major new changes through a press release without coming back to what the government's own evidence shows and presenting that as part of the the reasoning for introducing new and draconian actions. So we'll continue to focus on the evidence and on the proportionality of measures that the government wants to introduce. I totally understand the points you're making, Professor, about the need to encourage everybody to eat more healthily, and there's an awful lot that the industry is generally doing in terms of behaviour change. Whether it's you've probably heard about the Eat Them to Defeat Them campaign, which the big advertising campaign which ITV has been backing with the other broadcasters, and that is about making it attractive to children to eat vegetables. And we've supported that with an add-on package, which is for under 16s to get that message as well. There's things like the Daily Mile, which I'm disappointed, frankly, that the government hasn't given more impetus and more backing and more publicity to things like that, which these are, I agree, a multiplicity of different actions are needed, but what the government's announced just seems to us to fall short, to be over-focused on some things and under-focused on others, and to have missed the opportunity to make some useful localized interventions in areas where deprivation and obesity are much worse than in others. And we've seen lots of examples of programs at the local level, whether it's the Wakefield program or the Henry program, or looking abroad, the Amsterdam program, where there's a multiplicity of different measures that are happening, very practical measures that are having effect, are achieving results. So all we've seen over this last few days are interventions, regulatory interventions, and let's get obese people on bikes. This is not very adequate, frankly, as a response to the obesity crisis this country faces. And I think it's hugely disappointing and a missed opportunity.
I actually agree with you completely. We're very pleased to see the restrictions on advertising and marketing, because we've been trying to get those for a long time. But we're not at all pleased to see a much wider approach to more healthy eating. And as I said, making targets for reformulation on sugar, fat, and salt or calories mandatory. And we've been asking that for years. And as you probably know, the sugar reformulation, with Public Health England in charge of it, is not working. And the salt reformulation worked initially, but is no longer working. So those are very bad things that should have been corrected. And we also think the much wider use of taxes, as I said, should be promulgated. We've nothing against exercise, and exercise is extremely good for you for other reasons, but it won't make you lose weight. There's no evidence that exercising more per se causes weight loss. Now, no one is saying we shouldn't encourage children and adults to exercise, and it'd be a very good thing to do. So don't misunderstand me there. But when people say you could get rid of your weight by exercising, Boris Johnson going jogging, that is not very practical for people who are socially deprived, who are having to work, 12 hours a day, get home, look after children, all the sort of things that come in there. But there's nothing wrong with encouraging exercise. And there are other moves that can be done, local initiatives. I agree with you entirely. So we're not just focused on marketing, advertising, promotion. This is just one aspect of it. And I'm deeply disappointed that the government hasn't taken more action on these other things, because I think it will need to hit at various points to actually really affect developing obesity.
John, can I ask then the IAB's response to your consultation? What can you do in that time for the online ad sector?
Yeah, well, similar to Sue, I think the thing that is troubling is how, well, we've been told it's going to be a very short consultation for online. So it's probably a matter of weeks. And so far, the consultation process has involved the government ignoring their own research for it. So frankly, we're very nervous about how the whole process is going to go. I don't remain hopeful that we'll be able to get the practical, some of the, we talked about some of the extremes of the things that might happen, but I think they will happen unless we can, get the government to suddenly stop and listen and take a different approach. I think there will be some very daft things that happen, unfortunately, as a result of this.
Well, thank you all for joining me. This is a debate that could go on, and well, it will, because there's a long way to go with this. But wherever we end up, let's hope everyone benefits from the final decision, and it is a healthy decision that is made finally. So thank you all for joining me, and thank you to you, the audience, for joining us as well. If you have any views on this, please contact us on the Drums LinkedIn page and tell us your own thoughts on what this means for the advertising industry, and whether or not you do believe this is going to be a positive overall, or if there's some dark consequences ahead as well. Take care. Bye-bye.